Good morning, 8th graders. Today we're going to move away from America and we're going to move to our final stop on this tour around the world, looking at Jewry and its various locations on the eve of World War I. Our final location for today is Eretz Yisroel. And as we have seen, Zionism had electrified many people throughout the Jewish world and had horrified other people throughout the Jewish world. So many people inspired by the Zionist movement, both religious at first and then more non-religious, started moving to making Aliyah, going up to live in the land of Israel and the end of the 19th century. The first famous movement was called Bilu, which was a Rothschild Tevos. Where are my index cards? 1 second. Bilu was a Roshei Tevos for Beis Yaakov V'chu V'nelcha. Beis Yaakov V'chu V'nelcha. There's even a nice song called the Bilu song, but you can look it up on your own if you want to. They made it, and this is, of course, a pasuk in Tanakh that they took and they made the banner of their cause. Again, at the beginning, there were more Frum people. Petach Tikva is one of the famous towns started by Frum people. The Zichron Yaakov was another one. And one of the interesting things was in the original movement is that the Baron Edmond de Rothschild, who was very comes to the famous Rothschild wealthy banking concern. I'm going to write down his name here for you. Edmond the Rothschild. He himself had no intention of moving to Israel, but he founded the winery, which eventually became the Carmel Winery, and he founded the town of Zichron Yaakov, and he founded an agricultural school, which still exists to this day, called Mikveh Yisrael, the Hope of Israel. So this was the beginning of the movement back, and the people who came now up to Yerushalayim, to Eretz Yisroel, were called the Yishuv HaChadash, the new settlement, as opposed to the Yishuv HaYashan, the old settlement. Let me go here, I'll show you this. Yishuv HaChadash versus Yishuv HaYashan. Now, the Yishuv HaYashan was the community which was residing in the land of Israel for thousands of years. And mostly consisted of very, very poor, very impoverished Jews who were living on what was then called the Kolalim. The Kolal, nowadays Kolal means a group of young men studying Talmud after their marriage. But back then a Kolal meant a company which included many people who were very poor, who was supported by a community outside of Eretz Yisroel. So there's Kolel Holland Deutschland for people from Holland and from Germany, Kolel Shomrei Chomos, many different Kollel, which still, some of them, Kollel Poland, some of them still exist to this very day, and still provide funds for the Yishuv HaYashan, the older Yishuv in Eretz Yisroel. And the older Yishuv were people who were primarily Ashkenazim and Sephardim, but primarily, again, poor people. Very often they moved to Eretz Yisroel when they were elderly to die there, and the old Yishuv was very, very, timid. And they were not considered, for the most part, pioneers with a pioneering spirit, although that changed over time as they came into contact with the Yeshiva Chadash. Along came the Yeshiva Chadash and pretty much horrified them, because the Yeshiva Chadash came dressed as Europeans, conducted themselves as Europeans, many of them not keeping Shabbos, not keeping Kashrus, and they introduced this modern language called Hebrew. And this is the main father in modern Hebrew was Eliezer ben Yehuda. Eliezer ben Yehuda was an immigrant from Eastern Europe who took it upon himself to modernize the Hebrew language in order to make it relevant and usable nowadays. So, for example, the Hebrew word for electricity, as you all know, I think, is chashmal. Chashmal is actually refers to a pasuk in the in the Navi where it's talking about some really mystical flash of light which occurs in the heavens, not lightning, but something spiritual. And the Eliezer ben Yehuda took chashmal and made it the Hebrew word for electricity, and it stuck. Nevertheless, the many Yiddish speakers were horrified that that they would take a word from Tanakh which represented something extremely mystical and make it a humdrum everyday word, so they continued to use the word electric, even after chashmal was introduced. Some words took off, some words didn't. For example, the Hebrew word for a babysitter is a shmar taf. Shmar taf means somebody who guards babies or young children. So they really didn't take off, and now usually nowadays a babysitter in Hebrew is called a babysitter. So some of the words took off, some of the words didn't take off, and but Eliezer by and large made the language one which could be spoken and used in daily activities in a mundane way, in a way which was not necessarily the custom until then. Mundane means something which is, I'm not sure, I should spell that for you. Mundane means something which is just work a day, regular, as opposed to holy. Mundane. So Eliezer ben Yehuda made the language a mundane language, which could be used in the everyday conversation. Now there is as Gemara says that anybody who lives in Eretz Yisroel and speaks Hebrew is a ben olam haba. So back in the time of the Tanaim and Amoraim, there were people who spoke Hebrew, but even then, a lot of people just spoke in the daily interactions Aramaic. And at the time of the early 20th century, the language which is used in daily transactions by the Yeshuva Yashan was Yiddish for the Ashkenazim, and either Arabic or, to limited extent, Ladino, which is this kind of mix between Spanish and Hebrew, similar to Yiddish, was used for the Sfaradim, for the Edot Mizrach. Along came Ben Yehuda and those who collaborated with him, and they made this modern language. Ben Yehuda was free, but they called a free thinker. He was not a frum Jew. In fact, at least one, maybe two of his kids married Arabs, non-Jews. So that was seen as a threat. This Hebrew was seen as a way of modernizing in a way which was unacceptable to the old Yeshuv, to Yeshuva Yashan. So the Yeshuva Yashan and the Yeshuva Chadash were constantly in friction with each other. The Yeshuva Yashan, seeing Eretz Yisroel as a holy place made for the purpose of doing Torah mitzvahs and in extreme poverty and extreme holiness. There's a famous Yerushalmi tzaddik, his name was Reb Hirsch Michel Shapiro. Hirsch Michel Shapiro was one of the great tzaddikim in the 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century Yerushalayim. He was so poor that the only thing he could afford to change of his clothes from weekday to Shabbos was shoelaces. That's it. Everything else he wore the same. The poverty was unbelievable, but he was a great tzaddik, so he didn't bother him the way it would bother us. So again, this is a holy place, a very, very profoundly holy place. And along came these new guys, and they wanted to make it like a European city, like any other European city, with cafes, with movie theaters, with all those things which go with being a normal European cosmopolitan society. This created a lot of strife. Now, it happens to be also at that time, the rulers in Eretz Yisroel were the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Empire did not fall apart until after World War II. The Ottoman Empire which fell apart after World War II, and Ottaman Empire. It fell apart after World War One. I'm sorry, and before that, even in 1917, the British conquered Palestine from the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Turks were were not great fans of the Jews, but they didn't persecute the Jews either overly much. They were Muslims, but they weren't so frum about it. So the Jews were relatively safe in Turkey, in Palestine, as opposed to other places in that time, such as Russia, where there were tremendous pogroms, where Jews were killed by the surrounding population. And Eretz Yisrael wasn't like that. So again, at this time, most of the Yishuv is in Yerushalayim. In the beginning, in the late 1800s, the population started moving outside the walls of Yerushalayim. If you've ever been to Yerushalayim, perhaps you've noticed the windmill and the Mishkanot Sha'ananim, which is next to it, which is the first neighborhood outside the old city, and the Yamin Moshe behind it, which was the second neighborhood. And gradually people started spreading out. First the Jews, and then afterwards the Arabs as well. But the Yeshuva Yashan also, although still focused on the old city, its major center was the Churva Shul, that beautiful shul which was rebuilt a few years ago. But they also spread out and they formed the colony called Mea Shearim. Mea Shearim was a Yeshuva Yashan colony and still is. As the rest of the city, which rose up, was much more modern and cosmopolitan with various different degrees of religious observance. There was a Jewish community in Jaffa. Tel Aviv did not exist. Tel Aviv only was founded after World War One. Maybe it was late, sometime in the 1910s. I don't remember exactly when, but Yafo was there, which is now a subsidiary part of Tel Aviv. That was the only down there. And a later to be quite famous rabbi was the Rav in Yafo. His name was Rav Kook. And Rav Kook had a tremendous battle with the old Yishuv on one specific thing, which has reverberates to this day, which is the question of Shemitah. Every 7 years there's Shemitah. Shemitah is when you don't work the land. And the question was, if they kept Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael, they might starve. Besides that, the Yeshuva Chadash had no intention of keeping Shemitah. So how do we save them from the Aveira of not keeping Shemitah? So Rav Kook, along with others, his name is associated with it, but other people were involved as well, came to a concept of selling the land to a non-Jew. Very similar to what we do with Mechiras Chametz, only much more complicated. When we sell chametz to a non-Jew, we're allowed to keep it in our house because it no longer belongs to us. So you sell Eretz Yisroel to a non-Jew, and it no longer belongs to you. And you're working somebody else's land, not your own land. That's a very oversimplification to an extreme degree. But this became a major early cause of contention between the Yeshuva Yashan, which did not want to recognize this Heter Mechira, even though they were starving, and the Yeshuva Chadash, which actually couldn't care less, but it was their benefit, large, I shouldn't say everybody, many of them couldn't care less, but there were those who were interested in it and felt it was necessary because the prevailing conditions would lead to famine if there was no plant farming during the Shemitah year, and therefore they were proponents of the what's called now the Heter Mechira, the permission to sell the land. So this friction between Yeshuva Yashan and Yeshuva Chadash went into World War One, when the Yeshuva Chadash worked actively, many of them, to bring about the British conquest of Eretz Yisroel, because they knew that the British would be more likely to approve a Jewish state in the land of Israel. The Ottoman Turks had no interest in doing that. Even though Herzl had gone to the Sultan of Turkey, who was the leader of the Turks, and tried to get him to give Eretz Yisrael to the Jews. And in fact, the Agudas Yisrael also tried to negotiate with the Sultan to acquire the right to live in Eretz Yisrael. But those negotiations had not led to any significant breakthroughs, and therefore there was tremendous difference of opinion between the Yeshuva Yashan, which was afraid of a European power coming in and changing the scope of changing the nature of the this society in the land of Limor, and the Yeshuva Chadash, which actively desired them to come in and conquer the land. But that's going to be a later part of World War I itself. In the time being, let's remember that distinction, and I hope you took decent notes, between the Yeshuva Yashan and the Yeshuva Chadash. The Yeshuva, by the way, the Yeshuva Yashan and Yeshuva Chadash are still an issue, in case you didn't figure it out from before, till this very day.